Hi, I'm Jim Mandelbaum, Identity Architect at RSA, and today I'm here to talk about RSA SecurID and the evolution to RSA SecurID Access. Before we get into the technical stuff, let's talk about some of the really important stuff where we know that 63% of all compromises that happened last year, according to the Verizon data breach report, happened due to compromised identities. What that means is instead of getting elaborate intrusion methodologies, they just compromised identities to get in the front door. We need to get better at it, and we're going to talk about how we can do that. When we talk about traditional security, one of the things that happens is that when you try to implement security, you tend to put roadblocks in front of your consumers and your users, and what we end up with is a trade-off between convenience and security. And what often wins is convenience becomes more important. What we're looking to do is to try to create a fine balance between the two. Before we start, let's talk about SecurID. It's been around about 30 years. We have 25,000 and more customers out there. We have an average of 50 to 60 million users actively using SecurID. We have won many awards, including recently we won the 2017 SC magazine for Best Multi-Factor Authenticator. And, of course, the reigning leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Now let's get into the fun stuff. I'll try to keep it a little higher level, but at some points we will get into the weeds. So the first thing is let's get into the legacy SecurID, the product that's been around about 30 years. When it's delivered one of three ways. Most commonly, it's deployed as a VM, but you can get it as a physical appliance, and that VM can run in both a Microsoft and a VMware environment. The specs for it are pretty minimal, as you can see here. But one of the things that's really interesting is I always get people asking, well, what do you call it, SecurID? I hear it called Authentication Manager. The evolution of the product, it's had many names throughout the years. And even here at RSA, you'll hear many people refer to it as different things. It originated as a server. You'll hear it referred to as SecurID, SID, Authentication Manager. All of them are the same product. And unfortunately, you'll also hear me using them interchangeably today as well. So let's get into it. When you deploy the VM, the very first time you deploy your Authentication Manager, your SecurID server, and you end up with a primary instance. And what's running in that primary instance is the security console, the operations console, the self-service, and CT kit. What I want to talk about first off is these services here in that primary you're never going to use. We have a better way of doing it. The consoles that are running here, security console, that's your day-to-day administration, adding of users, deleting of users, assigning tokens, management. The operations console is for maintenance, patches, creating replicas, backups, restores. We keep a separation of duty so that different users can have different responsibilities. When we create a replica, and what that is you'll hear people refer to those as slaves, so a master-slave type idea. And that's really how it does work. What's running in the replica is all the same services, but the only service you're going to use is the operation console. It synchronizes all the data. So what you end up with is the ability to create multiple replicas wherever you need them to be. We also have different versions. When we look at SecurID, the common one you'll see out there is base, which allows you to have one primary and one replica. When you get to enterprise, it allows you to have one primary and up to 15 replicas. And again, the replicas are important to place where it's needed from network topology and infrastructure point of view. And again, we're going to talk about that. So when we look at a user that's in the DMZ or off the network, and they want to leverage self-service and CT kit capabilities, which we'll talk about, do we really want them to have access to our keys to the kingdom, which is where everything is stored? Not really. So what we did is we provide you something called a web tier. If you look at it, we put a red wall around, a firewall around our Authentication Manager servers, and we provide access from the web tier so that user can talk to the web tier. Well, that web tier, it's a standalone application, runs on either a Windows server or a Linux box. We use port 443 externally and UDP 7022 on the inside. It uses polling technology, so what we're trying to do is eliminate the chance of having attacks like SQL injection attacks or any kind of attack on it that's going to allow you direct access to the server. Again, creating that perimeter base so that we can allow traffic to go on the inside. Within the web tier, you can put your own corporate logo. You can put some legal disclaimers in there as well. So when that user tries to get services, instead of going to the network, they talk to the web tier. And that those services that I talked about, that CTKIP services, cryptographic token key initialization protocol for you nerds out there, RFC 4758, what it really means is secure token delivery. Let's talk about our tokens real quick before we continue about secure token delivery. What does that mean? So if we look at, we always have the hardware tokens, the FOBs, the legacy authenticators, also include desktop tokens for Windows and Mac. We have, of course, the mobile, which you're going to see mostly used, SMS capability. But for those of you who are concerned with the NIST guidelines on SMS, we also have the ability for it to make phone calls. So you'll log in, type your username, type your PIN, the phone will ring, and it will read you off your authentication code. We can send it through mail, which is, in my opinion, is a very insecure method, but it's there. And we also have a risk engine, which is designed for web-based services like OWA, probably the #1 use case. Going back to the web tier in CTKIP, when I have to get a token to that mobile device, there are 3 ways to do it. I can send it to you in a file, which is what a lot of our peers do, which is not secure. Can be done. We still support it. Not recommended. We can provide you a link, so you can click on a link that activates your mobile app that downloads the token through that CTKIP service. Or we can provide you a QR code for interactive response through self-service, which is obviously the preferred method. What CTKIP does is that mobile phone establishes a session between the mobile phone and the web tier. Provides a one-time activation code that is compared against the authentication user to make sure that that code matches what's been issued to them. If it does not, or it's already been used, they're going to get a message saying that they need to contact their help desk because it's already been used. If it is available and valid, that device gets interrogated for its unique binding ID. Every device has a unique identifier. We interrogate that device. What happens is a payload is then delivered down to the mobile device, and the connection is dropped. What's delivered is a device-bound unique payload to the app, which it then dynamically generates the seed record, and the server does the same thing up on the network. At no point is actually the seed transmitted, which means we stop the man in the middle. So if I was to put any kind of SSL interruption in the middle, I've stopped that from happening. An agent is probably the most confusing thing to a lot of people. What is an agent? An agent is very simple. All it is anything that challenges a user. The most common agent, VPN. So if this is a Cisco, F5, Palo Alto, Juniper, I don't really care. The process is the same. I have a user, they connect to the agent, and the agent handles the challenge for that user to get in. Typical flow. I have a user sitting on the outside on the internet, they talk to the agent, a VPN. On the authentication side here, you have a token that's showing you your token code. It talks to the authentication agent, the agent talks to the server, validates that the code matches, and if so, lets you on to the service that you want to do. Pretty straightforward, not anything difficult, but it's a little more complex than that. So what kind of agents do we support? Well, first off, there's over 450 partners that have done integrations pre-integrated into their solution. And I mentioned a few of the names before. If you go to rsaready.com, you'll find that all the integration guides are there with click by click with screenshots on how to integrate it. So things like your Cisco ASA, your Palo Altos, your F5s, you can actually get them up and running in a matter of minutes. It's very simple. From RSA, we provide you Windows agents, Linux PAM, ADFS, Citrix, and web services agents as well, so that you can protect your desktops, your servers, and your infrastructure, everything with a multi-factor auth. Most of the time, your services are pre-integrated and pre-built in. All right. Protocols that we use. Of course, we support the legacy radius. The one thing about it is we have built-in steel-belted radius into our authentication server, so we're going to support all the legacy systems out there. What that means is, instead of only looking at those 450 authentication services and partners, we have thousands of pre-integrated solutions by leveraging native SecurID as well as Radius. About 20 years ago, we took a look at Radius and said, Radius isn't good enough for what we're trying to do. It's not really high availability. It uses a failover service. What do I mean? If I have an agent and it's configured to talk to this server, if this connection goes down, it fails over to this one. We looked at that and said that's not really high availability. We built native SecurID. You'll see it referred to as ACE services and some of the older services like some of the Cisco boxes. What that means is this agent establishes an encrypted end-to-end channel. It interrogates and talks to the servers. So what it knows is what's the current state of the server. It knows that it's actually up, available to receive requests, and what its current utilization is, so it can send the request to the appropriate server at any given time. If the replica is currently busy, it can send the direction over to the primary or to another replica that's available. Now, earlier you heard me mention replicas. If you're on base, you get one replica. If you're on enterprise, you can have up to 15. Why do I need them? We talked about these agents. It's not about just putting replicas wherever a data center is. It's about putting replicas where the agents live. If I have data centers, let's say in New York and London and Singapore, but I only have VPN accesses in London and Singapore, I'm not going to put an agent in New York if it's not necessary. Put it where the infrastructure requires it. Use cases for the product, obviously VPN, you've heard me mention it. That is the number one use case. Web services. When we look at some of the new requirements under the federal DFARS rules, we look at some of the new SOX rules, we look at some of the new compliance rules, talking about protecting your infrastructure. Servers, anywhere I store critical data, HIPAA, medical data, anywhere I'm storing that data, I want to install an agent. We're talking about Windows, Linux boxes. We're talking about your Bastion hosts, your jump servers, anywhere that I'm going to provide access to other network infrastructure. Of course, the infrastructure itself. Don't forget that a bad guy is going to compromise a user ID, but I also want to build a back door. So I'm going to look at my infrastructure as well. It's probably already built in. Now, I've been talking about SecurID. That product's been around about 30 years. About 2 years ago, we made an evolutionary change to SecurID. And you can see, you're going to see the name RSA SecurID Access all throughout all of the RSA marketing literature. We have actually rebranded the product and added on additional capabilities. So let's get into some of the deep dive of what we did. Go with me. It's not a very technical diagram here, but if we look at a typical network, on the network, we have an identity store, AD, LDAP. We may or may not have SecurID. We definitely have some web apps that live on the network. In the DMZ, we have some web apps. They may be consumed on network. They may be consumed externally. We have some SaaS apps, your Office 365, Workday, Salesforce, whatever you're using, Box. And then we have some web apps that live in the cloud, typically legacy. And what do I mean by that? Username, password, submit. This is a typical environment. How do we protect it? Well, we know we have the SecurID that can protect all of your infrastructure, everything that's on-prem. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where our stuff is everywhere. The first thing we do is we give you an identity router. The identity router is a VM. You install it on your network. Typically in the DMZ, it can be installed wherever you want as long as you provide the networking access to it. It consumes the identity services, which means we're not replicating everything to the cloud. We consume the LDAP and AD services, and we tie in to consume SecurID for those users that already have tokens. This isn't a rip and replace, it's an add-on. That's the evolution piece. So what is it? It's a portal. If I take a PC, I log into it, I'm on the network, I log into the portal, I'm going to get a group of icons of everything that I'm enabled to run and have single sign-on. But it's also a router. The whole point of this is to provide a means for a user, whether they're on the network or off the network, access to all of my apps, no matter where they live and no matter where I am. So let's cover the basics. Single sign-on, number one use case, SAML. Will operate as both an identity provider and a service provider, or only a service provider if you already have single sign-on capabilities. We support deep leaking. So if I have a user trying to get out to, I don't know, Office 365 or Workday, they can be SAML asserted through this product. Pretty straightforward, nothing exciting there. But what we do is we not only give you SAML, we give you something called HTTP federation or password vaulting. Unlike what our competitors do, what they do is they use a plugin in your browser. And as you go to authenticate to the app, they stuff your username and password credentials into your browser and let you use that to authenticate. We don't believe that's the best way to go, leveraging probably your weakest point. What we do is we interrupt as a reverse proxy your session. So if I'm on the network and I come through and I want to get to that legacy web app, it has an internal database that's encrypted by your cert that the first time you come through, it looks at it and says, do you have a username and password in the database? If you do, it stuffs it in and you're good to go. If it doesn't, it'll prompt you, encrypt it in the database, and then assert you. We also support WS-Fed and trusted headers. What that means is, whether your app is on the net, in the DMZ, or off the network, we have a means of authenticating you securely and seamlessly. Now, it also gives us the capability of having users off the network, which means I don't care, again, where you are, whether you're on the network or off the network, I'm going to give you access to services wherever you happen to be. The cool thing about this is I don't need you to be on the VPN anymore. If you look at your user base, and I've been talking to a lot of companies about this, and I ask the question, how many of your users are on the network that don't need to be? How many of your users are consuming web services and don't need file share? I usually hear 70 to 80%. The anomalies are typically IT staff, and that's fine. But if I have vendors, out third parties, contractors, and employees working from home, and the only thing they need are web services, I would prefer to get them off my network, get rid of the VPN access, route them through the identity router, leverage the reverse proxy capabilities through trusted headers, through password vaulting, and WS-Fed, give them access to apps wherever they are, and get rid of network level access. The other thing you get is full audit logs. So as these users are coming in and moving these transactions, you can actually get visibility through your SIM as to what people are doing and how they're doing it. Great visibility, that's very important. Everything you see here comes with the enterprise license. So if you're already a SecurID enterprise user, you have this as part of your license. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to a little different into the identity assurance piece. Single sign-on, this is a commodity. That's the reason that we give it away to our enterprise customers. What's not, and what we do differently, is our identity assurance piece. And what we're going to talk about is identity assurance. So let's start with that web app. If we look at this web app, that's an asset. An asset is anything of value. If I'm a bad guy and I'm trying to get to this application, that's the asset I'm trying to get to. But when I compromise that identity, I need to look at the assurance for that user based upon the value of that user. So let me give you an example. Jim is a mortal user coming in to access an HR application. As a mortal user, what's the risk if my identity is compromised? For me, it sucks. For everybody else in the enterprise, they don't really care. I just get some paperwork. But what if I was an administrator? I probably need a little higher level of assurance because I have the ability to make changes in the software. I have the ability to make profile changes, policy changes, maybe even open up holes into the environment. I probably need a little higher level of assurance. But what if I'm in HR? Well, if I'm in HR and I access the system, I have access to everybody, which means my identity gets compromised as an HR person. It sucks for everybody. So when we look at that, we have different levels of assurance, low, medium, and high. Very simple to onboard an app, apply a policy. Remember, we're tied into the AD, so I can look at all the attributes. I can look at what groups they belong to and any other attribute within the identity store to create the policy of the level of assurance required to go in. Great. Where do I get that context? So as I get in the network, the first thing I get is my contextual awareness. Who are you? What groups do you belong to? Well, that's great because that tells me the level of assurance I need on the apps. And every app has those levels of assurance. I'm going to query you for your IP address. Are you on the network? Are you off the network? If you're on the network, how did you get here? If you're off the network, where are you? Let's geo-IP you. Do those match? Are you telling me you're off the network but you have an on-network IP or vice versa? That all matters. What about your device? Have you authenticated here successfully before? That adds weight. Have you already authenticated? Have you already met a level of assurance? I may not need to challenge you again. Do you have a session already active? Gives me context, and I'll get back to that one. Trusted locations. Maybe you have many offices, and what we can do is we can go into the portal, and we can go in and using Google Maps, we can drop a pin right on your building and say, okay, for 100 meters out, that's the size of my building. I can get that and use it. None of these by themselves have a lot of value unless you look at the big picture for context. But if I combine the trusted location with an IP address and the geo, I can get a pretty good representation. Am I somebody that's in the building, or maybe somebody sitting in a car in the parking lot hijacking the Wi-Fi and pretending to be here? That all has value. And again, all of your AD attributes. Now, all of these are static policies, and what we can do is put policies in here to make some go, no-go decisions. But what we can do is we can go further and we can look at a risk engine. So the risk engine is about identity assurance. It's a Boolean response, and what I mean by that is yes or no. So if I'm logging in, it's looking at all my attributes, it's looking at additional capabilities such as behavioral analytics. Is this normal for me? Is it normal for me to log into the HR system at 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning? Probably not. But if it learns that I'm an insomniac and I'm always up doing my work at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's normal behavior for me, why not? So it's going to learn, it's going to do velocity. Am I logging in New York at noon and in Paris at 1? Is it physically possible to get there? Of course it's not. That's not high assurance. So it gives you a response and it comes back and says, I am highly confident Jim is Jim, or I'm not. So you can go in and use a policy engine to make go, no-go decisions on a user. So let's talk through that. If you'll notice, logos are less here than they are here. The reason for that is based on policy. You may say, I have 100 apps. On the network, you can have all 100. Off the network, you can have 80. Oh, and by the way, if you're in North America, you get 80, but if you're outside North America, you only get 50. And if you're in China, you can only have 12. Not trying to pick on China, just using an example. You can actually get specific on go, no-go decisions as you come through the front door. So as I come through the front door and I look at the static policies, I look at the risk engine, I make decisions on whether I can get to the app or not. The next thing I do is, as I go through the side door, I interrogate you one more time. I want to make sure that as I've sessionized you, that your identity has remained consistent. We're looking for things like browser in the middle, session hijacks, man in the middles. And as long as everything is fine, we're going to let you through. But have you met the level of assurance? If you have, sign you in. If you haven't, I need to challenge you. I need to pop up a message on your screen that says additional authentication required. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, I already said if you're a legacy user and you already have your tokens, let's use those. Why go through a process of do a rip and replace when we can leverage what you already have and expand on it? So if I'm a user and I have a token and I click on an icon and it says I haven't met the level of appropriate assurance, then what I can do is challenge me and pop up and say I want a token. But we can do better. With the new enhanced authenticators, we can offer services like push. So I click on a bookmark or I click on a link through the portal, it pops up, and my phone goes beep or my iWatch goes beep and it says, are you accessing the HR system? I can say yes, I can shake my phone, I can touch my iWatch, I can click yes, if it is me. If I've been phished and it's not me and I see that pop up, I can say no, it's not me, deny that, and that user is stopped in their tracks. Again, everything is pushed off to the SIM, so those are getting logged, and you can create rules in your SIMs to look for those user anomalies. But if we need to have a higher level of assurance, we can do different types of challenges. So we've got push, I've already talked about. We've got biometrics, where we can leverage the fingerprint technologies in that mobile phone. The plain simple truth is that mobile phone has become the most important type of authenticator. Leveraging that mobile phone gives us the ability to do things like I already said with the push technology to do fingerprint. It also gives us the ability to integrate with iVerify. Now, iVerify helps us meet that higher level of assurance. It's like taking a selfie. Put the camera of your phone up. It looks at the whites of your eyes. There's some confusion as to what iVerify does. It does not use retina or iris. It uses iVein, which is actually more unique than your fingerprint. So everybody's eye veins are different. And the great thing about iVerify is that no matter how much sleep I've had, if I've had too much caffeine, while the veins may get larger and smaller, the patterns don't change. And that's encrypted and stored on your phone. What we're trying to do is leverage that phone to keep the authenticators local and validate if you're really you. In addition to that mobile phone providing that push technologies where we're looking again, push yes, no, biometric through your fingerprint, and biometric through iVerify, we have to provide an out-of-band technology so that if, for example, you're on an airplane and you've got GoGo in flight on your laptop, you're probably not going to have it on your phone. So we provide you an OTP, a token, in that enhanced authenticator as well. And you can protect it by policy with either a PIN or a fingerprint. So again, we're providing a multi-factor option to you in addition to the push technologies and the enhanced authentication and a better user experience. We also are a member of the FIDO Alliance, so we're leveraging those YubiKey FIDO U2F tokens. Those are also available for you as meeting a step-up level of assurance. So when I talked about that web app for low, medium, and high, you as a corporation or an organization, you to look at these authenticators and you push those authenticators through drag and drop into the buckets of the level of assurance that you feel that authenticator meets. So it's totally within your control. Now, as a user, if I go in and say I need to meet level of assurance of medium, and my options are, for example, a fingerprint, iVerify, or a token, and I come back and say I like the fingerprint option, it will remember that I chose that, and if I need to at a later time fall back to something else, it'll give me the option, but it remembers what a user's preference is. The key thing here and a differentiator we have than everybody else is we challenge according to the risk. A common thread you hear all the time is passwords suck. We all hate passwords. Password management is difficult. But passwords actually can be good enough. And I go back to this. If I'm a user and I log in every Monday morning at 9 a.m., I log into the same resources, the same services. The risk engine learns that's my normal behavior. If I do that, and even if I'm accessing a higher valued asset, do I really need to be challenged? It's a really good way of providing a great user experience. Now, you may decide that because it's a high value asset, I want them to be challenged every time. Great, that's on your policy. But we give you the flexibility to determine what levels of risk you're willing to assume, what posture you want to take, and what you want your user experience to be. Let's talk about that risk engine a little. That risk engine is really the crux of the RSA SecurID Access solution. This risk engine is where the future lies for this product. We can start leveraging that by ingesting external threat data. Things like badging into the building. If I'm logging in, I said every Monday morning at 9 a.m. I sit at my desk and I log in. Did I actually badge into the building? Does the system say that I'm actually on premises? If I'm logging in at my desk, yet I never badged in, one of two things has happened. I tailgated, which, of course, there's some education there, security, or I've got a command and control happening on my machine, which means I want to put roadblocks in the risk engine to say it's probably not Jim. What about things like ingesting SIM feeds like RSA NetWitness, where we're looking at resources that are potentially compromised, user identities that are potentially compromised. Jim is logged in the last 10 minutes from 5 locations. Probably a problem. Let's feed that back to the risk engine and say, you know what, Jim? For now, until we figure out what's going on, we don't trust you. You're going to get challenged every time. Sucks for me from a user experience, but when you look at the picture, I'd rather have to authenticate every time than be locked out of the system because they're trying to figure out what's wrong with my ID. I can still continue to function. Taking things like endpoint with NetWitness endpoint, where we're looking at devices that are potentially compromised. Maybe I want to raise escalation for devices. We look at CASBs. We look at UBA. All of those around the user itself and the assets they're trying to access. We can start ingesting that information into the risk engine and consuming that for external threat and providing that user experience. Again, I don't want to lock the user out. I may have to challenge them more, or I may have to challenge somebody or groups of users accessing resources, but they can still do their job. So let's look at a couple things that are coming in the very near future as well. Leveraging Windows 10 Hello, trying to use that voice and facial and potentially the fingerprint if they have fingerprint in your laptop as additional criteria for authentication. I may be able to add those authenticators into the table. Again, none of these by themselves, I would not probably trust the Hello features by themselves as high, but if I was to tie and chain them together where I did, well, you've come in with facial recognition on your unlock your laptop, but maybe I need you to give me a voice in addition to step yourself up, so we can provide that context around it. Proximity with mobile. You can go out on the web right now and on the YouTube channel and you can take a look at a demo we did, and we're going to be releasing the mobile as a proximity to lock and unlock your device, but that also can be leveraged as an additional artifact for authentication. If I'm, again, logging in Monday morning, I badged into the building, I log into my desktop, it goes to look and it says, hey, his mobile device is also next to his laptop. What's the chance of my mobile device being next to the laptop if I'm not physically there? Pretty low. We can look at that in context. We're also continuing to look at additional authenticators, and you're going to see more and more authenticators coming out for the product. If you have any questions, email address is right there. You can always reach out to your sales engineer or your sales representative. Thank you.